Hi, this is Professor Favors with American Literature. So today's lesson is on Walt Whitman's Song of Myself, and we are only going to look at stanzas 1 to 20. So make sure to have your document out. You can access it online. The Song of Myself, if you type it in as a research target, you should find a PDF. For my class, however, you do have access to a link. So this is American Literature, Walt Whitman's Song of Myself, stanzas 1 to 20. So this lesson is subject to fair use because I am including the 20 stanzas within this presentation, but it is for teaching purposes. So um, there are also pics, two pics of Walt Whitman as well. So this is subject to fair use. All right, so let's look at Walt Whitman. His date ranges 1819 to 1892. And so here's a picture of him. And I'm just going to read this slide and the next slide. The second of 9 children and born in 1819 to a Long Island farmer and carpenter, Walt Whitman is both the journeyman poet of Americanness and its champion. A journalist and newspaper editor throughout his life, Whitman worked as a law clerk, a school teacher, a printer, a civil servant, and a hospital aide, but he was always writing. From his teenage years until his death, his byline was on constant view. Contemporary reports suggest that Whitman was an industrious worker, but that he was often accused of idleness because his habit of long midday walks contrasted sharply with 19th century attitudes toward work. In Song of Myself, Whitman addressed these critics directly by writing, I loaf and invite my soul. I lean and loaf at my ease, observing a spear of summer grass. So the purpose of us only looking at 1 through 20, even though 21 through 52 might have the answer that we need. The only reason why we want to look at only 1 through 20 for Song of Myself is this idea here where Whitman is addressing his critics. He is being accused of idleness. He's being accused of idleness. Song of Myself is him addressing the critics. They're saying in a time of change, in a time of industry, in a time of work is important to us. 19th century attitudes towards work. He is being idle. So then the 52 stanza Song of Myself is his response to the critics. And that's why we're only going to look at 1 through 20 because 1 through 20 really gives us what we need. Okay. So when you are reading the 20 stanzas, Song of Myself, understand that everything that he is saying, line by line, stanza by stanza, is in a response to the critics who say he's idle within the context of 19th century attitudes toward work. All right, so for Whitman, too much industry dulled the ability to celebrate the ordinary. In the preface to the first edition of Leaves of Grass in 1855, Whitman expounds on his love for the common. Other states indicate themselves in their deputies, but the genius of the United States is not best or most in its executives or legislators, nor in its ambassadors or authors or colleges or churches or parlors, nor even in its newspapers or inventors, but always most in the common people. Whitman's love for the common people that he encountered and observed in the urban centers of the North is expressed in all his poetry. If his British contemporary Alfred Lord Tennyson is the national poet of mourning, then Whitman is the national poet of celebration. So, what you see here with Whitman, too much industry, too much industry dulled the ability to celebrate the ordinary. Every day there is a ordinary experience. And what he's suggesting here that all of these people who are about industry, and call it genius, right? So these are the folks who are business executives. These are the folks who are state, federal legislators. These are some of the people who are ambassadors, authors, colleges, churches, parlors, even newspapers or inventors. These are the people who are so busy with industry, and there's nothing wrong with industry in a sense that you still need to put your hands to work. But he was saying that people spent too much time in industry to the point that they missed the commonness of people, everyday ordinary living. And so again, Song of Myself is a response to the critics that you are spending too much time in industry. You're not celebrating the ordinary. You're calling yourself genius because of all these different categories, right? It's like a person listing all of their accomplishments on their resume. You do this, you do this, you do this, but there's some aspect of your life that you are missing out on. And that's what he wants to call attention to. All right, so let's look at some historical implications. Remember from the introductory PowerPoint lesson to the course um, on time periods, that every time you see something in terms of a time period 1819 to 1892, his his birth and death dates, and that's the 19th century. You want to look at what was going on during that time. Now, there's a lot more that's going on. I just only put here the most necessary, but let's look at it. So, 1819, we have the Panic of 1819, which is a financial crisis. Somewhere between here, we also had another financial crisis, somewhere like 1837. Thomas Jefferson founds the University of Virginia. So then we have different states becoming states, or different territories becoming states. So Maine and Missouri becoming a state. Florida becomes a U.S. territory. We also have Thomas Jefferson and John Adams, the presidents, dying on the same day, and then Andrew Jackson becoming president. We have Nat Turner's revolt, also slavery debates. We have Oberlin College beginning enrolling female students. This is a change in the dynamic of all men being able to go to college, right? And many of the institutions having to create uh, separate institutions for women, separate institutions for Black Americans. And so you're going to see this again in your final paper for this course on single sex colleges. And the title of that is Are Single Sex Colleges Obsolete? And so then 1845, we have Florida and Texas becoming states. Then we have the Mexican American War. What is interesting here is 1857 is kind of like a current issue that's going on today. But this was Dred Scott v. Sanford, and he sued based on the idea that he was free from slavery. And so slaves and blacks, um, the conclusion of the suit, the judge's decision, slaves and blacks descended from slaves were not American citizens and cannot sue. So then later we ended up having Emancipation Proclamation, which freed the slaves, Reconstruction era, assassination of President Abraham Lincoln. Then the 13th Amendment abolished slavery. The 14th Amendment granted citizenship and equal protection under the law, meaning that we're not necessarily equal. It's a citizenship amendment, but it basically means that it's equal application of the law. So if men can go to college, women can go to college. If white people can go to college, black people can go to college. So it's equal application of the law. So now this is the industry aspect of um, Whitman's critique. 1865 to 1913, these were two major industrial revolutions. Then there was a global transition towards manufacturing, technological improvements, rapid economic growth in these areas here. So during the 19th century, where there's a heavy attitude towards work and industry, within this context here of the 19th century, we have critics who are criticizing Walt Whitman that he's not industrious enough. And so keep this in mind as we go through all the different slides. So we're looking at the immediate text. Whenever you want to look at a literary work, you look at the immediate text. You don't go and find um, secondary source material to try to understand the text itself. You want to take some time to learn how to look at the text yourself, and that's what we're going to do. All right, so let's look at stanza 10, which is the hunt. I think I have it separated into a couple of slides as well. All right, so stanza 10. Alone, far in the wilds and mountains I hunt, wondering amazed at my own lightness and glee. In the late afternoon, choosing a safe spot to pass the night, kindling a fire and broiling the fresh killed game, falling asleep on the gathered leaves with my dog and gun by my side. The Yankee clipper is under her sky sails. She cuts the sparkle and scud. My eyes settle the land. I bend at her prow or shout joyously from the deck. The boatmen and clam diggers arose early and stopped for me. I tucked my trouser ends in my boots and went and had a good time. You should have been with us that day round the chowder kettle. I saw the marriage of the trapper in the open air in the far west. The bride was a red girl. Her father and his friends sat near, cross-legged, and dumbly smoking. They had moccasins to their feet and large, thick blankets hanging from their shoulders. On a bank lounged the trapper. He was dressed mostly in skins. His luxuriant beard and curls protected his neck. He held his bride by the hand. She had long eyelashes, her head was bare, her coarse, straight locks descended upon her voluptuous limbs and reached to her feet. All right, so when you think about the hunt, you sort of have to look through uh, the lines to see what's really, really going on. Part of this, part of this discussion is actually hunting. Where he talks about um, fresh killed game, kindling a fire. Anyone who has been on a hunting trip knows what this is. This is some familiarity. So he's throwing out key experiences or a visual of what it means to hunt. For falling asleep on the gathered leaves with my dog and my gun by my side. So we know this is a clear hunt because of the fresh kill game used by a gun. This is in contrast to one of the previous slides where the person commits suicide with a pistol. So the Yankee Clipper is under her sky sails. We're now on a boat. She cuts the sparkle and scud. My eyes settle the land. So there's some settling language here. Remember, early America was about colonization and then settlers. And then later, plantation owners, etc. A bend at her prow, that refers to the portion of a bow above a deck, joyously from the deck, and so that's confirmation. And then we know we are on a boat or a ship or something like that because the boatmen and clam diggers arose early and stopped for me. I tucked my trouser ends in my boots and went and had a good time. You should have been with us that day round the chowder kettle. So again, we're hunting. Now, the marriage of the trapper in the open air in the far west, the bride was a red girl. We know that a red girl is usually, or referencing to red, usually is Native American. I thought the interesting though thing about the language of trapper. A trapper when looking that up in a dictionary, it is a person who traps wild animals. So connecting Trapper to the bride of the red girl is suggesting that he's uh, that the person that Whitman sees is a trapper who is trapping a wild thing. Not necessarily, we wouldn't consider the person a wild thing, but that's the perception of the trapper uh, of the red girl, and that's the perception of the author of the red girl. But it's interesting though that I think that we need to note that the red girl has a family. When whereas you're going to see on the second slide from stanza 10 that the Negro that he references doesn't have a family. So her father and his friends sat cross-leggedly. Here's their character of smoking. They had moccasins to their feet, large thick blankets hanging from their shoulders, and then on a and then so then this person this bride is a red girl comes from a family. So the marriage of the trapper is the trapper gets to know her family. It's not like she's just so that's so the trapper is kind of like contrast, right? Because she can't be too wild if she comes from some origin, some place. And then on a bank lounge, the trapper, so he's lounging, right? Dressly mostly in skin, so he's sort of becoming like the environment. Um, Usually, it's the Native American who is dressed in skins, but we know it's a contrast because there's a luxuriant bird in curls protecting his neck, but he holds his bride by the hand. And then we have some character of her. So not only is she a red girl, but she has long eyelashes, head was bare, coarse straight locks, voluptuous limbs, and they reach to her feet. So we have some characteristic of the trapper. We have another characteristic of the red girl. We have characteristics of her family, and then, of course, this is the hunt. Um, Now, whether or not the trapper is a hunter, of course. So at some point, he had to hunt for the red girl. So keep that in mind. All right, the rest of stanza 10. The runaway slave came to my house and stopped outside. I heard his motions crackling the twigs of the woodpile. Through the swung half door of the kitchen, I saw him limpsy and weak, and went where he sat on a log and led him in and assured him, and brought water and filled a tub for his sweated body and bruised feet, and gave him a room that entered from my own, and gave him some coarse, clean clothes. And remember perfectly well his revolving eyes and his awkwardness, and remember putting plasters on the walls of his neck and ankles. He stayed with me a week before he was recuperated and passed north. I had him sit next me at table. My fire locked leaned in the corner. This is stanza 10. This part of stanza 10 is in contrast to stanza 8. Remember when he says, I mind them, or the show or resonance of them, I come and I depart. And then stanza 9 is so stanza 8 was him not helping, not offering any help, just basically, I come and I depart. Stanza 9 is where we were talking about the big doors of the country barn stand open and ready. And then he says, I am there, I help, I came stretched atop of the load. And that's stanza 9. Now we're in stanza 10, the second part of stanza 10, where he's looking at the runaway slave. Sorry about that, I said Negro, but it's actually runaway slave. And remember, the previous lines were about the trapper. So the trapper only trapped the red girl, and became one of the people in her family dynamic dressed in skins. But I thought it was very interesting that the runaway slave came to my house and stopped. I heard motions through the swung half door of the kitchen. I saw him limpsy. So there's a perception of him as we know that he's a runaway slave because of his skin color, and it would just be obvious during that time because remember this is 1819 to 1892. So we have runaway slave is a character. He's coming to a particular house, stopping, and don't forget that and there. And the poet says, I heard his motions crackling the wigs of the woodpile through the swung half door of the kitchen. I saw him limsy. So now there's a perception of him as being limsy and weak. And went where he sat on a log, and led him and assured him, so I'm here, I'm not an enemy. And then he brought water, filled the tubs for his sweated body and bruised feet, gave him a room that entered from my own, and gave him some coarse clothes. And remember perfectly well his revolving eyes and his awkwardness. And remember putting plasters on the walls of his neck and ankles. And he stayed with me a week before he recuperated and passed north. So usually runaway slaves were leaving from south to north. And I had him sit next to me at the table. My firelock leaned in the corner. Um, and I'm assuming that's a gun. But what this suggests to me is hospitality. During the time when runaway slaves uh, who did not want to serve their masters anymore involuntarily ran away, and at times they needed to get somewhere to refresh. And so, whereas he's not helping in stanza 8 when he says, I come and I depart, then the word help is referenced in 9 when he says, I am there, I help, I came stretched atop of the load. Here is a different types of help. Help is help is implicitly defined. There's a perception of him as a runaway slave, and a perception of him being limsy and weak, and assurance that I'm not going to do you harm. And so now he's going through the steps of helping him. That's bringing water, filling a tub, giving him a room, giving him clothes, staying with him, letting him stay with him for a week, letting him recuperate, let him sit next to me at the table. Now we're talking about some form of equality. We're probably, with these lines, we're probably close to the Emancipation Proclamation being signed with 1863. And so this is probably a few years prior to that, where there's still the struggle with master and slave. So just think about that. Sometimes the lines won't use the word help, right? In this case, between slides 8, 9, and 10. But look at the step by step step decisions, meaning that this is not an aimless wandering decision. Whereas in the beginning, I loaf and invite my soul to loaf, meaning aimless wandering. Here, he's actually alert, and he's making a decision to help a particular type of character in history that actually you could have gone to jail and gotten killed yourself if you helped a runaway slave. And so and this is the hospitality that America implicitly should have shown runaway slaves how to do. This would work like a step-by-step guide if we were looking at any of the abolitionists, and how they approached pursuit of abolishing slavery, by helping runaway slaves, by appealing to uh, appealing to the legislature, any type of way. This is what you should do when you help your fellow man, right here. Okay, so that's stanza 10. All right, so here's some resources, research archives, and educational information. So Walt Whitman Birthplace Association website, then research archives list of links you can find on that website. Some are good links and some are not. So I added a Walt Whitman archive link here, and then of course the source pig. All right. Thank you very much for listening.